So from my experience with it, it's just the fact that you're sharing based on your true events, experiences, your story with what you've had, the many conversations that you've had, the many instances that you felt a red flag upon, walking into a room or walking into a group of people, or, whatever it be. These instances carried out red flags where the message isn't simply that you're suffering, it's that you're clearly suffering based on the impact that you've had created over your life and over your livelihood. And so it's not just a belief structure that you're systematically being prevented from functioning on any kind of autonomous level of movement, expression, or your movement of your feet, basically to work, to establish love, and get your concerns met. So they're not only preventing you from defending yourself, but they're preventing you from maintaining any healthy relationships, because these people are creating proxy warfare. They're deep fakes that are trying to preserve your identity for themselves. And whether or not that case can ultimately be proven or not, the consequences that you're having to live through based on the very real perspectives that you take into considerable amounts of efforts are literally taking you away from deserved accountability to be able to communicate these things properly and clearly. And instead, it's not just the courts that are excommunicating you, but it's as well as the perpetrators of these crimes against their victim. So the many themes that I've described throughout history have been a childhood where the reports of abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and violence inside of the family were not adequately ever addressed, and instead they were legitimately utilized to manipulate the scenes and further those abusive attacks on my personal life and other people's lives, including anything that was natural and organic, created of relationships. So that's why my bosses would get called ever since I was a child. And so it's also the family court system that's failing to protect not only me, but failing to protect my ability to see my son. And then as soon as my son reached out to me, he was set up in the exact opposite direction as my best friend was, and they both ended up flying 20 feet out of the windshield, where my son is lucky to be alive and was in a wheelchair, where my best friend ended up dead. And instead, I can't separate these things from being coincidence based on the facts of how they were set up. But it's a long-term pattern that I know and have proof for, that there's identity theft, finances being abruptly attacked, employment being attacked, housing, reputation, and my relationships that are being undermined. And in a professional fashion, these areas of my life are being undermined. So it literally leads to criminal crime families and criminal syndicates working in an organized crime together to undermine me in order to protect the assailants and to protect my father's rape and sexual abuse. Not to mention the neurological and physical symptoms that I had to live through with toxic exposure unwittingly to me throughout my entire growing years and even growing up. It was just an unbearable amount of pressure to be placed inside of a body and a mind that you're literally suffocating down to the cellular level, where you're having feelings of confusion, frustration, anger, rage, and obvious memory problems to deal with the circumstances, just minutes to midnight, knowing that these people did something to you, to then acting like you're not missing anything at all the next minute, not even remembering that you had the proper questions in that fashion time and time and time again. So this leads to a progressive pattern that's being able to be witnessed, and then I had to move differently than I've ever had to move in order to save my life in the first place. Not to mention just the memory problems there, but it's like the tremors and that numbness and tingling throughout my body, numbness in certain areas of my body, and the difficulty in organizing my steady thoughts to legitimately get away from this syndicate. Especially when it's family, especially when it's proxied relationships, people that I loved personally that could do this to me. So feeling when I sought out for help that my concerns weren't only dismissed, they were micromanaged to deflect and minimize the situation in order to make it seem like it's all mental health, when it's a very calculated crime, just being reframed in the ways that prevent for investigations and true investigations of the underlying issues. So the repeated losses of employment, housing, financial stability, friendships, relationships, and even parental alienation to my mother that these brothers of mine worked together to leave at just a timeliest of fashion here, leaving you with fewer resources to advocate for yourself, as if it's not just a complete dick move on their behalf to not only leave their mother in that condition and that situation, but to leave me knowingly the condition that they literally bled me into, and also my sister born with congenital heart defect, having made it here multiple times to legitimately help me out. That, I mean, it just goes to show what levels of bitch that truly is of these men to even call themselves men at all. So ultimately it's having me advocate for myself, and literally hoping to advocate for my family in such a way that's gonna, hopefully be able to take a massive turn inside of my life, because otherwise these people are just getting away with the total life takeover of my entire life. And that's hard to explain because of the very calculated poisonings that literally is like a soul erasure since the day you were first hated on from being 3, 4, 5 years old on and onward. So the feeling that it took was a cumulative effect that was an attempted murder and an attempted erasure, literally to try and erase me out from life in a fashion of like just wiping me away from all existence as if I never existed at all. And it's also not allowing me to fully participate in my own life and my own life endeavors. I have never gotten to live inside of this house that I paid for to any kind of stretch of the imagination in any kind of autonomous way. I have, gardening supplies, and I have a rock garden that I wanted to plant, and it would just be beautiful. I've literally have like the plot in the back of my mind. I would have been able to probably establish not only having the materials, but creating a deck that would just be a little wraparound to the front. And my goal was to make it sturdy enough to like legitimately have a gazebo type of effect to part of it, to where I could inside that gazebo have like a hot